Hello, and welcome to this week's Midweek Moment. I have a story I'd like to tell you. Picture life on the frontier with John Wayne, Matt Dillon, or Lauren Green and their families. It was Christmas Eve 1883, and I was 15 years old and feeling like the world had caved in on me because there just hadn't been enough money to buy me the rifle that I'd wanted for Christmas. We did the chores early that night for some reason, and I just figured Dad wanted a little extra time so we could read the Bible. After supper was over, I took my boots off and stretched out in front of the fireplace and waited for Dad to get down the old Bible. I was still feeling sorry for myself, and to be honest, I really wasn't in much of a mood to read the scriptures. But Dad didn't get the Bible. Instead, he bundled up again and went outside. I couldn't figure it out because we'd already done all the chores. I didn't worry about it because I was too busy wallowing in self-pity. Soon he came back in. It was a cold, clear night out, and there was ice in his beard. "Come on, Matt," he said. "Bundle up good. It's cold out there tonight." I was really upset then. Not only wasn't I getting the rifle for Christmas, but now he was dragging me out into the cold for no earthly reason that I could see. We'd already done all the chores, and I couldn't think of anything else that needed doing, especially not on a night like this. But I knew he was not a very patient man at one dragging one's feet when he told him to do something. So I got up, put my boots back on, and got my coat. Mom gave me a mysterious smile as I opened the door to leave the house. Something was up, but I didn't know what. Outside, I became even more dismayed. There in front of the house was the work team, already hitched to the big sled. Whatever it was we were going to do, it wasn't going to be a short, quick little job, I could tell. We never hitched up this sled unless we were going to haul a big load. And Dad was already up on the seat, reins in hand. I reluctantly climbed up beside him. The cold was already biting at me. I wasn't happy. When I was on, Dad pulled the sled around the house and stopped in front of the woodshed. He got off and I followed. "I think we'll put the high sideboards on," he said. "Here, help me." The high sideboards? It had been a bigger job than I wanted to do with just the low sideboards, but whatever it was we were going to do would be a lot bigger with the high sideboards on. Then Dad went into the woodshed and came out with an armload of wood. The wood I'd spent all summer hauling down from the mountain, and then all fall sawing into blocks and splitting. What was he doing? I finally said something and I asked, "What are you doing?" "You been by the widow Jensen's lately?" he asked. Mrs. Jensen lived about 2 miles down the road, and her husband had died a year or so before and left her with 3 children, the oldest being 8. Sure, I'd been by, but so what? "Yeah," I said. "Why?" "I rode by just today," he said. "Little Jakey was out digging around in the woodpile trying to find a few chips. They're out of wood, Matt." And that was all he said, and then he turned and went back into the woodshed for another armload of wood, and I followed him. We loaded the sled so high I began to wonder if the horses would be able to pull it. Finally, he called a halt to our loading, and then we went to the smokehouse, and he took down a big ham and a side of bacon. He handed them to me and told me to put them in the sled and wait. When he returned, he was carrying a sack of flour over his right shoulder and a smaller sack of something in his left hand. "What's in the little sack?" I asked. "Shoes. They're out of shoes. Little Jakey just had gunny sacks wrapped around his feet when he was out in the woodpile this morning. I got the children a little candy, too. It wouldn't be Christmas without a little candy." We rode the 2 miles to Mrs. Jensen's pretty much in silence. I tried to think through what Dad was doing. We don't have much by worldly standards. Of course, we do have a big wood pile, though most of what was left was still in the form of logs that I'd have to split into blocks and split them up from there so we could use it. We also had meat and flour, so we could spare that, but I knew we didn't have any money. So why was he buying them shoes and candy? Really, I mean, why was he doing any of this? Widow Jensen had closer neighbors than us. It shouldn't have been our concern. We came in from the blind side of the Jensen house and unloaded the wood as quietly as possible. And then we took the meat and the flour and the shoes to the door and we knocked. The door opened just a crack and a timid voice said, "Who is it?" "Lucas Miles, ma'am, and my son Matt. Could we come in for a bit?" Mrs. Jensen opened the door and let us in. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The children were wrapped around in another blanket and sitting in front of the fireplace, a very small fire that hardly gave off any heat at all. Mrs. Jensen fumbled with a match and finally lit the lamp. "We brought you a few things, ma'am," Dad said, and sat down the sack of flour, and I put the meat on the table. Then he handed her a sack that had the shoes in it. She opened it hesitantly and took the shoes out one pair at a time. There was a pair for her and one for each of the children. Sturdy shoes, the best. Shoes that would last. I watched her carefully. She bit her lower lip to keep it from trembling, and then tears filled her eyes and started running down her cheeks. She looked up at my dad like she wanted to say something, but it wouldn't come out. "We brought you a load of wood too, ma'am," he said. Then he turned to me and said, "Matt, go bring in enough to last a while. Let's get that fire up to size and heat this place up." I wasn't the same person when I went back out to bring in the wood. I had a big lump in my throat, and as much as I hate to admit it, tears in my eyes. In my mind, I kept seeing those 3 kids huddled around the fireplace and their mom standing there with so much gratitude in her heart that she couldn't speak. My heart swelled within me, and a joy that I'd never known before filled my soul. I'd given at Christmas many times before, but never when it had made so much difference. I could see that we were literally saving the lives of these people. Well, I soon had the fire blazing, and everyone's spirits soared. The kids started giggling when Dad handed each of them a piece of candy. And Mrs. Jensen looked on with a smile that probably hadn't crossed her face for a long time. She finally turned to us and said, "God bless you. I know the Lord sent you. The children and I had been praying He'd send us one of His angels to spare us." In spite of myself, that lump returned to my throat and the tears welled up in my eyes again. I'd never thought of my dad in terms of being an angel before, but after Widow Jensen mentioned it, I could see that it was probably true. I was sure that a better man than Dad had never walked the earth. I started remembering all the times he'd gone out of his way for Mom and me and many others, and the list seemed endless as I thought on it. Dad insisted everyone try on those shoes before we left. I was amazed when they all fit, and I wondered how he'd known what sizes to get. Then I guessed if he was on an errand for the Lord would make sure he got the right size. Tears were running down Widow Jensen's face again when we stood up to leave. My dad took each of the kids in his big arms and gave them a hug. They clung to him and didn't want to let us go, and I could see that they missed their dad, and I was glad I still had mine. At the door, he turned to Widow Jensen and said, "The missus wanted me to invite you and the children over for Christmas dinner tomorrow. The turkey will be more than the 3 of us can eat, and a man can get cantankerous if he has to eat turkey for too many meals. We'll be by about 11. It'll be nice to have little ones around again. Matt here hasn't been little for quite a spell." I was the youngest. My 2 brothers and sisters had all married and moved away. Mrs. Jensen nodded and said, Thank you, Brother Miles. I don't have to say, may the Lord bless you. I know for certain He will. Out on the sled, I felt a warmth that came from deep within, and I didn't even notice the cold. And when we'd gone a ways, Dad turned to me and said, Matt, I want you to know something. Your mother and me have been tucking away a little money here and there all year so we could buy that rifle for you. But we didn't have quite enough. Then yesterday, a man who owed me a little money from years back came by to square things up. Your mom and me were real excited, thinking that now we could get you that rifle. And I started into town this morning to do just that. And then on the way, I saw little Jakey out scratching in the woodpile with his feet wrapped in those gunny sacks. And I knew what I had to do. Son, I spent the money for shoes and a little candy for those children. I hope you understand. I understood, and my eyes became wet again. I understood very well, and I was so glad that Dad had done it. And now the rifle seemed like very low on my list. He'd given me a lot more. He'd given me a look on Mrs. Jensen's face and the radiant smiles of her 3 children. For the rest of my life, whenever I saw any of the Jensens or even split a block of wood, I remembered. And remembering brought joy back, and it made me feel good as I rode home beside my dad that night. He'd given me much more than a rifle. He'd given me the best Christmas of my life. All of us at First Christian Church wish you and yours the merriest of Christmases, and we hope you'll join us tonight at 6 p.m. for our candlelight Christmas Eve service. And God bless you.